Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Common Sense with Conn radio call-in talk show. Uh, if you would like to call in and talk about your favorite subject, the number to call here is 773-1400. That's 254-773-1400. We'll be happy to take your call and entertain your suggestions as far as something to talk about. And if you don't call in and tell us what you want to talk about, you're going to have to listen to me. And that may not be too awful good. So, y'all remember the number and call in, and we'll talk about it.
We have a second line for those of you if the first line gets all backed up and you want to call in, and that's 254-771-2463. 771-2463. And also, if you would like to sponsor the Common Sense with Conn show or donate to it, keeping it on the air, we'd love to have you. You can make your checks to Conn Tatum, that's Conn, and mail them to P.O. Box 34, Davilla, Davilla, Texas 76523. Or you can call and talk to Mrs. Tatum at 254-300-1885. That's 1885. 300-1885. And we're going to start our fundraising session again here soon, and we would really appreciate anything that you all could send to get us started so that we can stay going through the summer and the fall.
Okay, I'd like to open with some real great news I just heard about. A fellow told me a couple of days ago. Mexico now has decided to build and finance a wall. But they decided to build a wall because Donald Trump just announced that he's going to deport all of the Democrats to Mexico. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, they don't want them. We don't want them either.
Yeah, they don't want them, and we don't need them either.
Hey, for every plane or bus load that we send back, can we send some Democrats with them?
Hey, that's a good idea. We could trade.
We'll just call them stowaways.
Yeah, we could trade folks from Honduras and Guatemala and places.
That might be a good trade. They might be more malleable.
Yeah, they'd be more teachable, and they might learn to love America more than Democrats now do. Anyway, we got a caller here already. George, are you there?
I am. Hi, Conn.
Well, I'm doing pretty good. What's on your mind today?
Well, how do you spell your last name?
Tatum.
U-M. And the last number on the zip code, 765 what in Davilla?
23.
Oh.
76523.
Got it. Okay. I'll try and be quick. I want to speak about profiteering, greed, and then as a sidebar, we have all these people in prisons that for less really minor offenses, sometimes long periods of time, and yet we think nothing of the government thinks nothing of sending guys like Cohen and Manafort to jail for lying because they teed off Congress by lying to them. 3 years we have to pay for this guy at a country club. Just unbelievable. Now, we're talking about the tariffs. I kind of laugh. Trump is absolutely correct. Well, then make it in the states. Back after World War II, well, actually before that, when laws were enacted to eliminate child labor and all this other stuff, which I hardly agree with. But somewhere along the line, as we started raising in wealth and getting bigger salaries, and by the end of the 19th century and after World War I, all these industrialists said, well, I can't afford this stuff. So what did they start doing? They destroyed the textile industry in the Northeast and the shoemaking industry by going to Asia where they could find cheap labor. And it's kind of like our beer. Because of the rationing in World War II, we got used to drinking the standard beers that we have today, and you start, thank goodness for craft beers. So we kind of liked that taste after a while. We couldn't go back to the original beer that we used to drink before World War II. Anyway, so they liked the idea of cheap labor and sweatshops over there. and got used to it. And so now we're reaping the whirlwind of what happened. I mean, we can't exist without something from China.
Well, George, you bring up a subject that I wanted to talk about, and that is people are against the tariffs, and they want more stuff made in China, etc. Go down to Walmart. I'll give you a challenge. Go down to Walmart or TSC or a lot of places, pick up a tool or anything made out of steel, and then tell me where it's made. It's made in China.
Of course.
Everything in there is made in China. Now, the problem that I see is in the future, if we have a conflict with China and they say, we're not going to send you any more tools or steel or products, if we don't have the ability to make it here, then what are we going to do? How do you, if you have a conflict with China or anybody else, you have to have steel to make military equipment or to make tools or to work on whatever. If we are totally dependent on China, as we are right now, if you don't believe it, go down and look at Walmart. If we are totally dependent on China, aren't we setting ourselves up for a real disaster in the future?
Well, and let me add to that. You know, China holds the biggest volume of our debt, and that's like 1.123 billion. I mean, million. I can't even talk. $1 trillion. So that's, you know, $1.123 trillion that China can use against us as firepower during this trade war.
Well,
And-
there's a lot of collateral damage. There was a program on this morning where they were interviewing the CEO of Cap America or something, a guy who makes baseball caps. And at least 65%, if not more, of his caps come from China, but he does all the rest of the work on them, all the custom embroideries and logos and everything else. And yeah, I see that. But
you know, I think Trump has to hold strong. He has to go big and enforce it now, because he's the only one who has, you know, FCC may not like this, but, you know, he's the only one who has the balls, the cojones to do this. You know,
Well,
and people
this goes back to my profiteering thing. I
Yes.
mean, these guys got greedy, and they have shareholders. So they had to keep the shareholders happy, and, of course, their profits increased, and, of course, they got cheaper goods that they could add their price to it. But the other part of that is our energy industry here. If we are now energy independent of other countries, why is our gas so expensive, and why are we still importing oil from a couple of other countries? I will tell you why. Because
You don't think they want to make more money, do you?
well, there you go. Yeah, I call that profiteering. There's two gas stations down near me, and there's almost a 20-cent difference, and yet you go to the same branch gas station somewhere else, and it's 15 cents. I mean, it's cheaper. I mean, it's all individual people gouging other people because they're out in the country, sort of thing.
Well,
Remember that big pipeline that went from Canada down to Houston?
Keystone.
Well, that is a closed pipeline. It employed so many thousand people to build it, but we don't get any of it. It goes from Canada to the Houston docks, where it's uploaded onto tankers. So there's another lost deal. But if we're energy independent, why are we still buying fuel or oil from other countries?
A lot of that is because we, the American people, just don't give a damn. Now,
I wasn't going to say that. I'm glad you did.
Let me give you an example of how we don't care. There's one service station that I deal at, and I fill up very, very often. And I keep asking the question, if I drive my pickup into that service station and I fill up a 30-gallon fuel tank, now the fact that I drove my truck in there indicates to me that there's at least some amount of fuel in the tank. It's a 30-gallon tank, and I just pumped 31 and a half gallons into my tank. Okay, do the math, folks. You know, how is it possible to put 31 and a half gallons in a 30-gallon tank when there was already some fuel in it? Well, I have called the agriculture department that regulates that, and I have complained about that, I think, on 3 different occasions, and nothing has happened.
They told you your fuel gauge is off.
Yeah, yeah. But I've got sense enough to know there's 100 pumps at that station. If they gouge everybody 1 or 2 gallons per fill up, if there's 100 pumps and they fill up, let's say 3 or 4 times a day, that's 100 times 3 is 300 times 2 gallons per fill up that they gouged you. The 2 gallons times 2.5 a gallon or whatever it is. How much money is that?
Yeah.
And why is it that Sid Miller's department does not investigate that and put the quietus on that?
Maybe it's because of the quote-unquote biofuel corn stuff they're putting in it. But
well, that also helps destroy motors, but that's a different subject. But my point is, if it's obvious that they are doing that to the general public, why don't we stop that? Well, we don't stop it because let me see. Could it be that the chief of that department got a little bit of gratitude money from somebody? I don't know, but I'm just saying, logically speaking, why is it that that particular company can gouge that many people that often at that much money and nobody wants to stop it? Why is that?
Well, you're preaching to the choir. We could go on for this forever, but one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to somebody else. But, I hear about this, the immigration thing. I'm a naturalized citizen, so I had to go through the very painful process. It took me 5 years and everything else. Yeah, I spoke Canadian English, but still, it's a process. And I know that stationed overseas, they have pamphlets for soldiers who want to marry spouses from foreign countries, and there's pamphlets out that tells them how to go through the immigration process and that sort of thing. My brother served in Vietnam. He was Canadian. He was in the Marines. But when he got married in Newfoundland, he wasn't allowed to bring his bride home because she wasn't a citizen. But that was taken care of. That's minor. But the laws haven't changed as far as what you have to do to become a citizen. So, but the system down there in the border is just pathetically broken, horrible. And I'm all for sending busloads of people to the gated communities of Nancy Pelosi and the members of the Democratic.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen, George.
I know it's not. I know.
They're not going to send them to Nancy Pelosi's neighborhood. They're going to send them to Chicago or somewhere like that. But when are we, the American people, going to wake up to what our politicians, mostly Democrats, are trying to do to America?
I'm scared to death of what's happening as far as...
Well, look at Beto O'Rourke. How many votes did he get in the state of Texas?
Too many.
And his campaign was, let's ban guns and open borders. Now, apply just a little bit of common sense to that. What do you think the end result of that would be if we did that? Can you say Venezuela or worse? And how many Texas people voted for that moron? That's what scares me, is people fell for his line and voted for him, and what he's talking about is destroying not only Texas but the United States.
Well,
what are we using for brains, George?
Well, I don't want to make a complete comparison between Nazism and what's happening in our country, but I read a book about a young kid that was in the Hitlerjugend in World War II, and he explained the whole process of, from a little age, he wore the little shorts and the little scarf, and they went to camps every weekend, and it's happening in our schools. The curriculum is changing.
Yes, it is.
We are teaching kids the wrong kind of history.
What did Adolf say back in the 1930s? He said, "Give me the youth of a nation, and I'll give you the nation."
That's right. And
what are we doing? That's what we're doing today in America. We're giving the youth of our nation to the progressive Democrat, communist, Marxist. Well, I don't know what you want to call them. I got all kind of names for them, and some of them I can't say on the radio.
There's a friend of mine in town. Her daughter's in the softball team at Belton High School. Anyway, they had a party the night before they were going up to the state finals or something like that. And she happened to have in the house a Trump doll or a little statue or something like that. Some of the girls said, "You have a Donald Trump statue?" And she says, "Yeah." I mean, this gal is as conservative as the day is long, and she's proud of it. And even her team were going, "Oh, oh, oh!" It's like they were infected with botulism or something that they were in this environment. And
Okay, how did that happen, George? How did we get brainwashed? And
we let it happen.
Is it brainwashing? Is it because we freedom-loving conservative Americans, Christian Americans, don't stand up and say enough is enough? Hold it just a damn minute here. When are we going to stand up, George?
Use the analogy of the United States are the white hats. Everybody else, the bad guys, are the black hats. So we get the you-know-what kicked out of us. We get thousands of people massacred. We have Pearl Harbors. We have all kinds of stuff happen to us. Then we get mad. And then we go off and we win. But we have to, we're not proactive in.
Well, George, now you're leading into another subject I wanted to talk about today. But thank you for the call. Doggone, you've been a good caller. Don't lose this phone number.
I've got it. Don't worry. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Okay.
George.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We're going to go to a break in just a second, but I wanted to say this to George. It says, back in February of 2019, after being rejected by the National Honor Society for character issues, after publicly voicing support for President Donald Trump, Boris, and I'm going to spell his last name because I don't want to mess it up, Kizenko, is a New Jersey junior high school student, has started a grassroots organization called High Schoolers for Freedom, which will work to expose bias in schools and defend conservative students in the classroom. And they already are in 20 states. So that's High Schools for Freedom. So I thought that was pretty cool. And that was I just wanted to piggyback on on George's call with that.
Well, and God bless that young man for
And
standing
smart
up.
as a whip. Oh my goodness.
Well, and we need more high school students like that because they're the future, folks.
Well, if he's the
Now-
future, we're going to do good.
Yeah, it's well, the program before us, they were talking about the lack of economic education in our schools, in our high schools, and the thought occurred to me. He's right. We're not teaching our children anything about economics, or gun safety, or anything else in our high schools. Why is that? I might bear a little testimony here. My daddy taught me how to shoot when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I've used that all of my life. Consequently, I taught my children, my wife and I taught our 7 children about gun safety and the use of guns when they were 5 or 6 years old. Now, our children are teaching their children about guns and gun safety and etc. So that now if I have a loaded gun, I can lay it on the table or whatever. And if one of my grandchildren comes in, I don't worry about that gun because my grandkids know about guns. All right, the same thing should be true of economics, constitutional freedom, etc. My problem is we're seeing a breakdown of the family units. Parents do not teach their children anything anymore. They wait for them to get into college to learn something. Okay, if we waited for our kids and grandkids to get into college to learn about gun safety, they never would learn it. The time to teach kids is when they're little and let them grow up with that knowledge.
And that's why the socialists do that too. We got to go
Yeah.
to break.
Yeah, y'all hang in there and we'll be right back. And let me tell you, are we back on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you about old John Dean up there at Dean Electric. He is a very, very fine supporter of this here show. So another good reason to call him with your air conditioning needs or your electric needs or whatever it might be.
So Ed's on the phone. Hey, Ed.
Hello,
I
Mr.
got a
Conley.
word for you before you start, okay? I saved this one for you, okay? Deflectocrats.
Deflectocrats?
Yeah, they deflect all the time. Deflectocrats, just for you, because you always have crazy, twisted words. You're like my mother. She used to do that.
Anyway, we're now we got to be careful and not criticize any Democrats, Ed. You know, heaven forbid.
Well, I want to know if you're all ready to get fired up. That's what I want to know.
Well, yeah, I guess, and I do not doubt for a minute that you'll get me fired up.
Turn it on, turn it up, and turn it on. Let's go.
Okay, there's many hot potato issues facing our country today. It's like, where does one begin? Certainly, the invasion across the southern border is chief among them, but there are other crucial issues taking precedence also. So I'm going to go down a list here, if you don't mind. Treason and sedition, number one, against our president by
Okay,
Congress.
wait,
federal
are you
agencies-
talking into the phone really clearly? Because you're kind of faint.
Sorry. Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, start that last part again. What's your top of your list?
Okay, point number one, treason and sedition against our president by Congress, federal agencies, Antifa, snowflakes, and assorted crazies. And not to forget the violence of Antifa toward patriot groups and patriots in general. Good Lord, you can't even wear a MAGA hat without being attacked and then portrayed as the enemy by the Ministry of Propaganda prostitutes and the real possibility of civil war and anarchy in this country.
Okay, hold the phone, Ed. Just now, you done got me cranked up here.
That was his purpose.
If you come around the corner on the street and Antifa's there in the middle of the street and they've all got a brick in their hand, when can you shoot?
Well, when your
Because-
life is
We need to understand that if you're in New York and you shoot one, you're probably going to go to jail. But if that happens in Temple, Texas, or anywhere in Texas, if somebody tries to hit you with a brick, that's assault with a deadly weapon, folks. And I think in Texas you would be legal if you defend yourself.
in fear for your life and as a last resort. Those
Yeah.
are like the justifiable reasons for using deadly force.
But I'm trying to emphasize just how serious this threat is, and that's what you're talking about. Is there's numerous threats just as serious, but we don't realize how many threats and how serious they are.
Absolutely. If I may, the next point is events in Iran and our possible involvement, which I believe we should not meddle in other countries' affairs. And our military should be positioned on our borders defending against invasion from the so-called immigrants and any other group who would seek to do us harm and spreading disease nationwide.
Okay, Ed, let's not forget now the reason Iran is a growing threat is because we had a president named Barack Obama that gave him 145 billion with a B dollars to build missiles and nuclear weapons and all kind of things to fight us with. Now,
Well, you can go back even further if you recall with the Shah of Iran. Again, this was a case of us meddling in the affairs of other countries, which I don't agree with. I believe, think you believe, that we need to strengthen our own country. We need to concentrate our activities and focus our concerns on protecting our citizens rather than meddling in the affairs of other countries to the benefit of the few, I would say, corporations, but it's primarily the banksters who cause this discontent.
charity starts at home, Ed. That's an old saying, but so does security.
Absolutely.
A lot of things start at home, not in Iran or Iraq or somewhere else.
Ed, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Always great talking to you.
Okay.
And to follow up on that, did you want to, tell that story about, what were you saying the other day? About when somebody didn't think it was such a big deal. It wasn't going to affect them, and they were in another state, and then it was in the next town,
yeah.
and then this and that. Because that kind of piggybacks on not meddling in other countries, which I agree with Ed about. But in some cases, like Iran, who's putting their tentacles all over the place, and it's going to have an effect on us, and now they're threatening our bases, and
Well, let's apply that same story just to the United States. And the story is there was a Jewish man living in, I think, in Berlin, and he heard through the grapevine that the Nazis were rounding up Jews in Poland. He said, "But I don't live in Poland, so I don't care." And then he heard that they were rounding up Jews in another city, and he said, "I don't live there, so I don't care." But then when they came to his city to pick him up, there was no one left to help him. So very often we don't worry about a problem until it's our ox that's gored. Well, let's apply that to the United States of America. The story about the Nazis and the Jewish people, that was a multinational problem. Let's keep it just in the United States. We today don't care if they eradicate the Electoral College. What do you mean we don't care? The only way that we have in Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Iowa, wherever, the only way we have a vote in the presidential elections is through the Electoral College, because the greater population density is in New York and Los Angeles, California. Those two places can and will dominate the presidential election. So if we allow them to destroy the Electoral College, we will have no vote in the next president. So you see what I'm saying? So many people say, well, that's what they want to do in another state, and I don't care because I don't live there. Well, you better care, because what affects other states in the United States affects us. At any rate, here's Raymond on the phone, and he's going to tell us what he thinks about all this. Raymond, what do you think?
Yes, sir. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go on ahead and get to the point and ask you a question about this and see if you can answer the question for me. After all these past presidents, why did it take Donald Trump to be elected, and he comes up and puts his foot down on all these people that have been ripping us off, all these countries, China, everybody else has been ripping us off for all these years, and these other presidents never did do nothing about it? You have yourself a good day, Mr. Conn. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, Raymond. And my answer to that question is Donald Trump is the only one that's had guts enough to act like a man.
And he's not an insider.
He is a man's man, yeah, and he's not an insider. He doesn't owe all this debt to donors and other people that have put him there, and those in the different parties that dictate what he says and does. He's independent of the DNC or the RNC or the whatever. He's trying to do what helps America, and he's been very, very successful at helping America, not some corporation or some donor. I keep saying that before the next primary, we the voters need to look at who a candidate's donors are, and then look at their voting record. If we have a man running for U.S. representative or state representative or senator, whatever they're running for, who put them there? Who owns them? Look at their list of donors. If they have a huge donor from New York, or his name is George Soros, whoever it may be, that's who owns that guy. They tell him what to vote on and what to do when he gets to the U.S. Congress. Okay, consequently, look at his voting record. We need to examine these things before the primary, because the primary season is when we really need to change our representatives, senators, whoever it may be. After the primary is over and we have a Republican versus a Democrat, you don't have any choice. You better vote for that Republican. So the time to fight this battle is in the primary season, not in the general election. Okay, so much for that. Uh, I was wanting to follow up on something else that Ed and George and them said, but I'll get to it after the break. Y'all hang in there. We'll be right back.
Girl, you taught me how to hurt real bad and cry myself to sleep. Showed me how this town shattered dreams. Another lesson about a naive fool who came to Babylon. Found out that the pie don't taste so sweet. Now his guitars, Cadillacs, hillbilly music.
There's old white yokel dog on the hate to
lonely
interrupt this
streets
song.
I
That kind
call
of brings me
home.
back down.
Yeah, my guitars,
And George getting me all stirred up, and Raymond got me going again. But anyway, that's how come we have this show. If y'all have something to talk about, well, the number to call in here is 773-1400.
That's
give us-
area code 254, people.
Yeah, 254-773-1400. Good, if you don't call in, you're going to have to listen to me. Now, one thing, I'm going to refer to my notes, something I very rarely do nowadays. We start the show and the phone starts ringing and I don't ever get to my notes. So I'm beginning to wonder why it is we make notes over here. Anyway, one thing I wanted to bring up today is the people of America used to operate on common sense, logic, and traditional values. Have we abandoned that way of thinking? have we abandoned that way of voting when it comes to voting for people in public office, things like that? Do we now apply a little common sense to our vote, or do we just think with emotion and tolerance, and we want to be tolerant of everybody and every group and everything, no matter if they're trying to destroy the country? We believe in tolerance and that kind of stuff. I have a real problem because I see a growing acceptance of very radical left-wing progressive. Now I got to be careful what I say here, but just for example, look at how popular and how acceptable the LGBT community is all of a sudden. It wasn't very long ago that you didn't want any part of that group. And now all of a sudden they're on the news just about every day, and we seem to be tolerant of them and of other
Because
groups.
they're forcing us to embrace them.
Well, they are.
Instead of them just doing their thing, now we all have to embrace them.
Well, we do, and how did we get to this point? Why do we have to embrace radical groups, be it LGBT or what comes next?
Or Sharia law.
Or Sharia law. What comes next? NAMBLA? How many of you...
I got a story for you on that one.
Okay. How many of us in the listening audience know what NAMBLA is? I learned about it 30 years ago. I came in late, turned on the TV, and it was a talk show, and the moderator or the talk show host had a guest on, and he was the president of NAMBLA. That is North American Man-Boy Love Association. Anyway, he asked the president of NAMBLA, he said, what is your goal? What are y'all trying to do? The guy said, we want to repeal any law against men having little boys for sex. And the moderator said, well, you mean down to age 18? He said, no, to the cradle. Now, I asked the question then, and I'll ask it again now. How in the cat hair did that fellow get out of the studio? Was there not a father or a grandfather or an uncle in there that would take care of him? I gotta be careful.
Okay,
what I
so
say here,
here's the story. Okay, so Disney lovers beware, and I have to be really careful. So I'm gonna read this a little slower because I have to figure out what word I'm gonna put in for what. But anyway, absolutely unbelievably horrible. This is a real sicko. NAMBLA, North America Man-Boy Love Association. It's a pedophile group, and this is Roseanne Barr's son. He went out on Twitter and he made a video, and he called out Disney for rehiring James Gunn. And so in doing so, he was reciting, if you will, some of James Gunn's tweets. And some of them are the most disgusting, awful, descriptive things that he did to little boys and wanted to do to little boys. And so I have to be very careful. But anyway, this is a very light one, not bad compared to the rest. I like it when little boys touch me in silly places. The Expendables, that's the movie, The Expendables, was so manly, I effed the poop out of the little boy next to me. I remember my first NAMBLA meeting. This was all different tweets, by the way. It was the first time I felt okay about being who I am. Some of those guys are still my BFFs. And he says, I'm going to do a big Hollywood film adaptation of The Giving Tree with happy endings. The tree grows back and gives the kid a BJ.
Well,
so there are 20,000 of these tweets by James Gunn. And I want you to know who James Gunn is. James Gunn is the one who is the director of the Guardian of the Galaxy franchise. and several other movies, a bunch of other movies. And he works solely for Disney people. So,
Well, and let's keep in mind here, folks, not to interrupt Tina, but
oh yeah, interrupt me because I don't want to read any more of this filth.
well, it is filthy, but it is becoming acceptable in our society, and that's what scares the crap out of me. Look at how we accepted the fact that Bill Clinton would get on the airplane with Jeff Epstein and fly to the island down there somewhere where he had a bunch of little boys. And Bill Clinton was going with him on his airplane. Now, what was Bill Clinton doing when he got there? I don't know. I won't make that judgment, but I'm just saying, how many people thought the sun rose and set in Bill Clinton? And he was associating with who?
And still does. And his wife was making those trips too.
And yeah, and we still
Hillary.
accept that. Why is that in America all of a sudden acceptable?
Well, my understanding.
Have we become so emotionally tolerant of every group and every individual that we will accept anything?
Well, because of the brainwashing that's been done through all of our TV shows that we watch and the commercials in which we watch. And how about these commercials that have two men kissing and having their arms around each other on the couch with their legs crossed that come on during prime time when our children are watching that, and we don't want our children watching that, even though it doesn't. None of the shows in which we're watching have any kind of gay, type tendencies.
Well, like I say, why is it we're so tolerant now of the LGBT group and other groups like that? And are we going to become that tolerant of NAMBLA? Is that what, I'll ask the question, if you are that tolerant of NAMBLA, LGBT, etc., how are you going to like it when it's your son or your daughter that's in this group? How are you going to like it when one of these pedophiles gets a hold of your 10-year-old little boy at the city park or wherever it is? You're really going to like that, aren't you? Well, we need to not be tolerant of it now in order to stop it. And now see, you done got my...
Well, it's one thing for people to do what they want to do behind their own closed doors. It's another to push it off on the rest of the majority of society and then force them, force feed it to them and then force them to embrace it. And that's exactly what's being done. The problem is, or my question is where is all that money? If they're only 1% of society, where is all that money and power coming from that they can get this done with? And then you go and you loop that in with, drugs being legalized, pot being legalized, and all this other stuff. All I see is a dumbing down of society, dumbing it down, making it more subservient, making it need the government more, things like that. And I know that sounds conspiracy theorist type thing, but if you look at the overall destruction of the fabric of our society, I can't see it going anyplace else other than the society becoming more and more dependent on government and dumber and don't care what happens.
And none of us want to talk about conspiracy theories. Oh, that's taboo. We can't talk about that. How else do you explain what's happening in our country? How else do you explain, just for example, the caravans coming up through Honduras, coming up through Mexico? I asked the question when I first saw that on TV, who's feeding them? Who's bringing them water? When you're talking about thousands of people walking hundreds of miles, somebody's got to be feeding them, somebody's got to be taking them water, somebody's got to be transporting them. Who is it?
Well, we now know who it is.
Well, it's George Soros
and his groups that he's put together, that he's funded. And I don't understand, and I don't mean to get you off track here, but I don't understand why the United States government doesn't go back and pull the 501c3s on these organizations that are funding or what's the word I'm looking for?
For those of you who don't know, 501c3 is a tax exemption. That means they don't pay taxes because they're exempt, just like the First Baptist Church is exempt under 501c3.
Well, and one of these is a church. it is a Methodist church, and evidently there's several Methodist churches, which I was just shocked about when I started doing the research on all this. But anyway, I don't understand why the American government doesn't go in and pull, the 501c3s on these different organizations
Well,
that are
but-
propagating this type of stuff.
But explain to me why the government doesn't pull that. Also explain to me real quick why the membership of that church is still a member.
Because the
If-
whole church is part of it. But why,
Well, if I was a member of that church, it would take me about 5 seconds to get the hell out of there.
because the whole congregation believes it. But if these are several Methodist churches, I mean, I don't know enough about the Methodist organization to know how that all works, but I can't imagine it goes across the whole country that way with the same line of thinking. And this particular church is just
Well,
going beyond its normal reach.
recently a Methodist church in Waco decided that they would not perform same-sex marriages. And a lot of the membership over there really objected to that ruling by the leadership of the Methodist church in Waco. I cannot imagine why members of that church or any church would demand acceptance of the LGBT homosexual thing, whatever how you want to describe it. We used to operate on traditional values, mostly based on biblical values. The first commandment that God gave, as I understand it, was He told Adam and Eve to go forth and replenish the earth. He didn't tell John and Joe to go forth and do that. He didn't tell Mary Sue and Billy Joe to go do that. He told Adam and Eve. That means a man and his wife. So how are we abandoning that teaching and that traditional value in favor of homosexual activity and all that kind of far left wing stuff? It just concerns me that we are abandoning traditional values that made this country what it is.
Well, and to touch on that, I guess they did some new research, and I don't remember where it came from now because it was several shows back. But anyway, they were saying how the United States is becoming a godless society. The atheists have become the largest religious group in America, the religion of no religion.
Yeah.
And then you've got this kid that just shot up the school in Colorado, which my understanding, and I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, somebody please call in and let me know, that it's an LBGT school. They call it a STEM school. And that the girl identified herself as a boy, or maybe it was vice versa. But anyway, she identified herself differently than what she biologically is. Anyway, but they had satanic symbols painted all over the car, on the hood and on the passenger door and this and that. So,
Well, and it was on the news that the boy loved Barack Obama and hated Donald Trump. Is this what our high schools are producing? Is this the kind of people that is this the result of education today?
well,
I think we're fixing to have to go to a break.
but he's been bullying and whispering in their ears how they were going to die for quite a long time. So people knew about this, and plus they had a parent that called in, and I want to touch on that for a half second when we come back. We're going to a hard break, and we'll be back in a few minutes, folks.
Y'all hang in there.